G'day, I'm Daniel and I'm a filmmaker based out of the Gold Coast in Australia. Today I've taken over Isaac's channel to show you guys how I've built my Canon C70 rig. Now I've customized this rig to be able to adapt to all the situations that I put in it, whether it's handheld in a run and gun situation or on a tripod for a studio sort of setup. I think balancing it like a car. It needs to be front to back, balanced perfectly, like 50-50 weight distribution, as well as a low center of gravity. If I can hold the top handle and feel that all the weight down the bottom is like a pendulum and holding itself there, then to me that's the perfect setup. I've been shooting professionally in a run and gun solo shooter kind of situation for the past 5 years. And this isn't my first rig. Before this I had a C300 and before that I had a C100. Both had their own challenges when it came to mounting things, and this, I feel like the C70, with the configuration I've got, allows me to have the most customization for the situations that I put it in. Okay, I've broken down the rig into its components. Obviously at its core is a Canon C70 with a speed booster from Canon, the official one. I like that because I usually run a 24-70 lens, and I feel like that's the perfect focal length, gives me the extra stop of light, and just overall, I've just got EF glass to begin with. Okay, so obviously the Canon C70 has a bit of an issue with its threads on the bottom. It has a east-west thread configuration rather than the typical north-south. So to begin with, I've got a small rig base plate that adapts this so that you've got plenty of threads on the bottom. On the top, I've got the small rig top plate, and I actually bought this one in a kit. The bottom plate and the top plate with the top handle. So attached to the bottom is this base plate that I call it with my rods on it. I use this to help the camera level itself out. It wants to fall out over the time. It also gives me the ability to mount items onto the back, which I'll show you later. So I'll just put that on. I always use the 2 screws that are able to be mounted in here. I just feel like you never want to use one thread because it has the ability to twist. So now once that gets locked down, that's gonna be nice and solid. I use a Miller tripod, so I have my Miller plate on the bottom. So now that that's installed, it gives us a really solid base. The camera is flat to the ground. I can put it down on a rocky dirt kind of road and it's not going to fall over. I achieve this by having my mounting plates at the back, and I have this little rod to threaded adapter. So often this is used to mount a rod onto, say, a top plate, but I've actually used it in reverse. I've got it mounted into my rod and it just sticks out the side. And all it's doing is it's like training wheels. It's sort of sticking out wide and stopping this camera from wanting to fall over. I usually put the top handle and the audio on next. However, because I've actually run these cables before, it's actually easier to put these on first. You can probably tell I've used a whole bunch of soft Velcro to keep these in the right spot. Included in this is a dummy battery that goes to my monitor, and that's because the C70 only has HDMI. There's also 2 3.5mm audio cables. One of these is 3.5mm to 3.5mm for my shotgun mic, and the other is a Condor Blue Mini XLR splitter 3.5mm on the other end. So that means that I can get channel 1 of my Wireless Go 2 into left and channel 2 of my Wireless Go 2 into the right. We'll just start by putting this in the right spot. We'll connect it all up. Now my D-tap plug, I actually wrap safely around this little training wheel that we talked about earlier, and that just sort of keeps this longer cable managed so it's not going to fall around. It also keeps it tightly down the bottom so I can just plug it straight into my battery. Now, I actually got these right angle HDMI plugs. Now these actually line up perfectly with the C70 and a monitor, and that allows it to not stick out like most HDMIs and get broken and stuck on things. Now that we've got all of this in place, one thing I forgot to mention, sprigs. If you haven't got them, they're lifesavers, they're amazing. They keep everything where you want them to be. So I actually have a sprig at the top here, which I just use to keep this main circle bundle in the right spot. So next thing to mount on the top plate is this audio rod that I've made up. So this is just a small rig part that allows you to go from threads to rod. This is a 4-inch rod from Small Rig, and then 2 different types of cold shoe mounts that attach onto rods. I'll mount this onto the top plate. So now that we've got our audio mounting system onto the top plate, we've got a Rode VideoMic NTG. Now I like to mount this thing up as high and as away from my camera lens as possible. That's because I often find that depending on the lens, like my 70-200 f4, you can hear the IS internally in those little motors running around. So you can probably tell here that's quite a distance away, enough that you're not going to pick it up. It's far enough forward as well that we can get as close to the subject without getting into a wide angle lens. So that uses the 3.5 to 3.5 mil cable. Now I use that on channels 3 and 4 on a C70 because the VideoMic NTG has a dial on the back that allows me to adjust volume, leaving the back audio panel for channel 1 and 2 of the Mini XLRs for the Wireless Go 2. Now, why do I use a Wireless Go 2? I did a shoot with Isaac one time where we're in this big studio room with lots and lots of people, and I had Sony analog microphones. They were great at long distance, however, they ran into the same issue that the digital versions did, where we had some interference in the room and we had dropouts. The thing that saved Isaac's audio files was that they recorded internally, so we were able to pull the files off of those and sync them and get perfect audio without any dropouts. So since then I've swapped to those. It's also a lot nicer. I don't have to worry about batteries. These are charged through USB-C, and it's such a smaller form factor on the whole camera. I often run 4 wireless mics into my camera as well. So in this situation, I would then remove shotgun mic and then mount 2 Wireless Go 2s onto this same cold shoe platform. Both are 3.5 mil, so it's not an issue. So that uses our Mini XLR to 3.5 mil from Condor Blue. Okay, so working our way up is now this small rig handle that came with our top plate and bottom plate. This one's pretty straightforward. I'll just mount this onto the top plate. Tighten this down. Isaac always thinks that I tighten things way too tight, but when you're traveling in the middle of the bush and you have corrugations and vibrations on the road, things just seem to like to come loose. So everything gets tightened right down, as long as you don't break the threads. So on top of my top handle is now a small NATO rail. This is my monitor that I use. It's a Atomos Shinobi. I don't need to do internal recording, and I feel like the 5-inch is the perfect size for me. I've upgraded it to include this sun hood. Super important, I find, because I'm often outside in the middle of the day in harsh sun. So seeing my monitor without any reflections and nice and clear is really important. I put off buying this for so long because of how expensive it is, but it's been a lifesaver so many times. I'll show you how I can move it later on. Now we just get to plug this in. We have a dummy NPF battery that goes to our D-tap at the back, and then this nice right angle HDMI plugs into the side there. Now I find the plug on the side of the Shinobi isn't the most snuggest fit. So sometimes it can wiggle and you get kind of like jittery or coloration, black and white or something. So I have another sprig at the top, which I end up clipping in these 2 cables, which just means that everything's just a little bit more secure, and I've never had a problem since. So finally, battery system that powers the whole thing. I've upgraded my Canon BPA 30 battery to the Nano C98 battery. Now that is the same capacity as a BPA 60. That just clips into the back of the camera. However, we now have a D-tap on the back. That means that our monitor can just plug in straight into the back there. So now we're getting pretty close. Final piece of gear. This one's from SmallRig, is a matte box. I have an adapter on all my lenses that accommodate this. That goes onto the front. I can add the barn door. I've found sometimes I've had to shoot with my camera on a tripod or a handheld into the sun. That little bit of adjustment, it can be a lifesaver when it comes to glare into your lens. Artistically, that's fine, but if you're trying to document something and that's really flaring up the lens, lightsaber. Final thing is, I think it impresses the clients a little bit when you've got one of these big things on the front, but it's actually got a purpose for when there's sun flare going into the lens. Okay, so there we go. That's my Canon C70 rig build. Obviously, as I said before, I think that balance is like super important. So being able to pick up your rig right in the middle and have all the weight down low center of gravity, as well as a balanced rig, is just super important when it comes to handheld and run and gun sort of work. The audio is obviously in one spot, and I can adjust it so that I can take the shotgun mic off and run 2 Wireless Go 2s into the 4 channels of audio. Having a sun hood for my monitor, super easy. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is the reason I don't use a battery up high is once again comes down to this balance. You want that low center of gravity. So by having a dummy battery and it runs down to this battery in the camera, means that all my weight is down low. Once again, that's probably why I prefer a 5-inch monitor over a 7-inch, as well as not using a cage. This battery actually is quite large for what I need. So I find I get probably about 4 hours running the camera and the monitor together, which I've just got 2 of those, and that gets me through a day without a problem. So the final little feature that I wanted to show is how I can mount this monitor in a different spot based on what I end up needing it for. So on the back here is actually a SmallRig NATO rail. Okay, so I've got my Milo tripod here. Say I'm doing a shot which is actually up quite high. So I'll mount this camera onto the tripod. If I'm looking down on something, all of a sudden this monitor up high is a real issue. I can try and tilt it down, but I have issues trying to see it clearly, pull focus, etc. So with this NATO mount on the back, I can just clip it right onto the back here, lock it in, and then I've got a really great clear view into what my camera's seeing up high, sometimes even higher. And I can tilt it down, say I'm doing a cooking show or something like that, and I've got to look down onto the guy chopping. Camera can be up super high and I can see my monitor very clearly. And then I also find when I've mounted my monitor back up here and I'm putting it into my chest, so I've got my nice grip on the side here, I put it into my chest. This NATO rail actually gives me a really nice flat spot to smoosh into my tummy. So that's a nice comfortable spot. And I like having the rods here on the side so that I can have a nice solid grip onto my camera. 1, 2, 3, and then adjust focus. I can then obviously adjust my monitor to the correct angle, smoosh it really tight into my chest and get some nice hip movement and not get any vibrations. Okay, so that's my Canon C70 rig build. I'm really happy with it. Nice balanced rig that I can use handheld, tripods, any situation. It seems to accommodate what I need to do. Thanks so much for watching. I really do enjoy building these rigs. I've actually helped Isaac a couple of times with his. I mean, he keeps stealing some of my ideas, but you know, it ends up being the ultimate rig setup. We'll leave a list of the items in the description below. Obviously, some of these items were all over the place, but if you have any comments, feel free to leave them. If I get lots of comments, maybe I'll start my own YouTube channel. But anyway, thanks again. I'll see you in the next one.